Good morning, how are you? Let's get into what's happening in the world. A big shout out to Manuela Blanca. The first comments are coming in here for the second update of the day. Let's look at the scenarios. What's happening? A synagogue is also reported. A synagogue destroyed, affected by an Israeli attack. I mean, at the end of the day, Israel is a country with a Jewish majority, now attacking a country that also has Jews, and well, it's also a very serious issue. What's happening in the world? Obviously a very interesting topic. What's happening, especially with what they're now calling the potential mini-war, not nuclear, but they're calling it the mini-world war now, the worst-case scenario, right? Obviously, we're not at that point, but that's the most visible scenario. Look, let's get to the information. There are several opinions that are very different from each other, but it would be interesting to analyze them. Go ahead and give it a like, share it, and let's get to the information, right? Just help us out with that, share it, give it a like, and well, let's get to the details. First, an interesting image. We start with this image where you can see that a while back there were a lot of insects circling around. It's just that this time they say these are called army ants and they rely on pheromones to track what's ahead. If an ant crosses its old trail, it creates a circular trap and they start spinning around until they die of exhaustion. It's like they start spinning because they see these pheromones, so to speak, and they keep going around and around, following their own trail until they die. It's quite a curious phenomenon in this case. Well, it's very clear how the phenomenon works, but it's also super strange, right? You can also see, well, these incredible images. Here we see a rabbi in a synagogue, but in Iran. Yes, according to the reports. And well, obviously this caused a lot of annoyance, a lot of outrage for the Jewish community within Iran. The chief rabbi, Yaoles Jaman, the leader of the Jews in Iran, inspected the ruins of the synagogue. His synagogue, by the way, the same land, had been attacked according to various media reports. This has already been published by international media, including ABC, North America, and Infobay. Well, among other outlets, because suddenly controversies arise. Where did you see this? I don't know what. Well, it's already reported in various media. A synagogue, they say, suffered heavy damage from an Israeli attack. They say the synagogue was destroyed by an Israeli airstrike. And well, now different reports are starting to come out. This extremely tough, tremendous situation within the war, well, there are also some really strange things happening among them. It's also noteworthy that there have been intense attacks on the bridges, something we mentioned in the previous broadcast, but more images keep appearing. These would be other attacks, other bridges that were reportedly affected in the early hours between Monday and Tuesday, that is, for today, by Israel and the United States. They have been intensely attacking railway bridges. Yes, that's what they're attacking. Well, according to reports from the regions, especially in the West. Israeli officials claim that the attacks were aimed at preventing the movement of military equipment belonging to Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. And well, it's part of the preparations for the deadline today at 8 in the evening to launch a full attack, as Trump said. Basically, to wipe out the entire civilization of that country. It's a tremendous issue, isn't it? Really, really? Very exciting, isn't it? But anyway, what are the scenarios? Before talking about the scenarios, this image also draws attention. That's in Thailand. An ostrich on a highway chasing a cement truck after escaping from a farm cafe. When the truck left before the gate was closed, the 5-month-old bird went and started chasing the truck. It was captured several kilometers ahead. According to reports, it was unharmed. They were able to find it in good condition, right? That also draws attention. But anyway, curious things. Let's go to the scenarios. First scenario, the worst scenario of all. That this conflict generates what they call a mini world war. We're already discussing a scenario where they agree to proceed. Bah. Why could this happen? Why are they warning about it? And what do they mean by this, right? I mean, we're talking about... Well, that would already be a bigger escalation, and there's a main reason, besides the war itself, right? Obviously, but there's a main reason that we'll actually talk about in more detail in a moment, but we can see it on the map. This would be the worst-case scenario. Because of what the Iranians have said today. It's that if there's an attack, as Trump says, on the facilities, that if there's an attack on civilian targets, their reaction won't just be to close the Strait of Hormuz, but they'll also close this strait. I mean, there won't be any passage to the Red Sea in either direction. Forget about the Suez Canal that's here. It won't be useful anymore. And everyone who wants to sell from Asia to Europe or vice versa, they do it by very expensive airplane, or they send it by ship, but going all the way around Africa through South Africa, taking about 10 to 20 days longer in addition to the extra costs this would imply. Nothing. So, to begin with, if that escalates to a level where you're not only affecting a fifth of the world's oil and gas and other things like helium, etc., but you also close the other strait, and you hit 20% of the global economy, so it would be a collapse. I mean, economically speaking, many companies wouldn't survive. There would be others that would, I suppose, but obviously we would already be talking about a crisis, a severe crisis, a black swan as they call it. And the thing is, it would be very clear who would have caused it. Yeah. I mean, just like the pandemic was at the time, that causes a crisis, a tremendous one. Everyone here would look at one person, which is good then. Here a decision was made that was wrong. I mean, it would be tremendous because if you said, well, but look, all of Europe went to war, you'd say, well, the blame is shared, you too. In this case, you could say, well, Trump Netanyahu, right? But in the end, well, you know that Trump Netanyahu wouldn't have gotten involved. In the end, he would have gotten involved. Very soon, right? 2-3 attacks and he backs off. But this has already reached a much more serious level, and well, everyone would turn to look at Trump, as they say. I mean, they'd have to look over there. What's the scenario? Why do we talk about a scenario? Well, first of all, they'd come in here. Not just the United States, Israel, and Iran, obviously, but here, besides proxies like Hezbollah and groups like the Houthis, and both are already involved. Those ones are already there, right? But here we're talking about other countries getting involved in the conflict. Another thing being requested within the Revolutionary Guard is said to be carried out. It's an extensive attack on all the countries. Let's go with that part of the scenario. I'm sure they'd report it would be more or less. About 8 countries would be left in a blackout. I mean, a blackout in Bahrain, which is here. Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, aside from Saudi Arabia. All of Kuwait. It's not clear, man. Let's leave it as inconclusive. Another one that would be left in a blackout would be Iraq. Obviously, Iran. Iran would be left in a blackout because its power plants would be attacked, but Iran would respond by causing blackouts in at least 7 or 8 countries. Maybe it would try to do it against Israel, trying to cause blackouts, at least at some plants. No, at that point, I really don't know about Yemen. I'm not so sure that the attack will extend that far when it comes to blackouts, right? So it would be a simultaneous blockade. Blockade in Hormuz, which is this area, and the blockade of Bab al-Mandeb. It's this other strait, it's the Al-Mandeb one, it's here. And Hormuz, which is here. Good. And actually, if you notice, this one is extremely narrow. I mean, last time we measured it, right? Last time we measured it. Now we're going to measure it again, because I already forgot the measurement. Let's see. Measuring from here, which is the narrowest point, 24 kilometers. Honestly, I don't know if they have mines, but they do have missiles. And look, it's not about them attacking every ship. No, if they attack just one ship, the rest of the ships won't go through. So, well, they do have the capability to do it. They have their missiles, they have ballistic missiles, they have drones, they have boats, which can indeed attack one of these ships. In fact, they've already done it. Here the problem is that if this happens, I mean, if the Strait of the Red Sea, let's call it Bab al-Mandeb actually, If they close that strait, we would probably be talking about Europe getting involved. Why? Because Europe has much more interest here. So, if suddenly you're gonna take away, you're gonna hit the European economy, maybe then you'll say, wait, don't get involved, because if not, we'll have to get involved too. And that's why people talk about a mini world war, if that's the worst case scenario. What effects does it have? Because that's the immediate effect. What we're seeing is just the effect of the conflict. But what broader, more global effects does it have? There's a report that I would like you to analyze. It's by Professor Steve Keen. He appeared in the SEO Journal yesterday, right? I think they uploaded the video yesterday. What this gentleman says is that in about 3 months, in the worst case scenario, there would be a famine. If Iran doesn't surrender, there will be a famine in 3 months, basically. And in 3 months, you would start to see it. You would start to see it, right? It's not on a global level, but as always, famines and these effects always have a bigger impact on the poorest countries. In those countries, fertilizer prices wouldn't just go up by 50%, but by 100 or 200%. And you might say, well, either you don't buy the fertilizer and you don't have food, which can happen, or it's going to be much more expensive. So that famine could affect around 20 or 25%, I think it said, something like that. I mean, let's say if it were 20%, a fifth of the global population would have a hard time. Well, they would have a hard time if they don't take enough precautions, if they don't prepare, if they don't... Well, then they're done for, right? Especially, I insist, countries that depend heavily on imports but don't have money. Because, I mean, Singapore as a country depends practically 100% on imported food. It doesn't have any, it's a city-state. I mean, there's no more land, it just has the city, and that's the whole country. They have tiny pieces of land where they've started producing food for a couple of years now in these really tall structures, but it doesn't help them much. I mean, you can't feed an entire country that way. So they buy food from about 90-something countries, like they buy beans from around 20 countries, corn from another 20 countries. They spread out their risk so that if one country stops selling to them, they have plenty of other options, but they have a lot of money. So they can buy and they can have enough food reserves for a long time. I mean, no, I can't imagine such a serious problem for a country like that, even if it's very dependent. I think, but other countries that barely produce enough to eat, and then suddenly they say, well, hey, it's going to cost me more, not just the fertilizer, but me va a salir más caro el diesel para los tractores. That eating is going to be expensive for me, so hey, they tell me, fertilizer, expensive. Not just that, the effect is economic anyway. O sea, a nivel mundial. But probably the more serious one is the food. But the serious one, well, probably the most serious one, well, more serious is probably the one right now. It seems to me, at least, that Iran's strategy is not to negotiate at all. Absolutely not. Or it's as if you said, well, there's a little hope they'll negotiate, right? I think they've already seen with Trump that the less they negotiate, the more desperate he becomes. What I suppose is that they're waiting for a mistake. I mean, there hasn't been any serious mistake, so to speak. It could have been the rescue, but it didn't happen. I mean, the rescue went as planned. But one mistake can cause the war to turn around. I'm referring to the support. Even if the war doesn't have support, it doesn't have that much either. It doesn't have that many people against it who'd go out and protest and make demands and so on. So right now, there isn't such serious pressure inside the United States either, which would be something that could potentially stop the war. On the contrary, the issue with the pilot has actually made Trump a bit bolder in the sense that he wants to go a little further. And on the other hand, Iran says, well, I also want to go further. But today he gave more statements, according to Iranian media. Today he gave a report that will embolden Trump even more because he says they are indeed on the verge of collapse. In other words, they're still resisting, but they don't have much resistance left. So if that's the case, then it's serious and it would justify Trump going a little further. Another scenario could also be, let's say, something in between. Not an all-out war, not an open war, but a war of attrition, in which Trump says, I'm going to continue, I'll leave some of the military there, I won't send any more, I'll just leave them there. And they'll be there for 1, 2, 3, 4 years, carrying out bombings and holding some fronts. What would those fronts be, according to this scenario? The fronts would just be a small piece, but a key piece of this area. So, in order to have some security in this area, it would mean taking one of these islands and Carr Island. If they take these islands, then the pressure will be here and here. This is where the war would be. They would be constantly fighting in this area for months or even years. The war of attrition would be very intense because at least for a while, nobody wins. Or nobody loses, nobody wins. Or everyone loses, let's say. This could last for months or even years. There would be massive use, especially of drones, missiles, and constant cyber attacks, right? Global security, forget about aviation, would be really complicated. I mean, the impact on tourism, oil, and all of that. Sooner or later, the world would adapt, more oil would start being produced in other areas, and eventually the world would adjust, but the war would still go on for a while. Iran is betting in this scenario on imposing long-term costs so that, let's say, the conflict can't be sustained and they can claim victory. Experts say that the conflict could persist for a long time without the root causes being resolved. So, this scenario would be exhausting for both countries, but also for the world, at least in the medium term. In the long term, maybe not so much, but in the medium term, yes. There would be global economic strain, at least in the first year. The markets would be unstable for years, according to the state. And then there's a third scenario, which is also one of the most complicated, especially considering that they're already distributing these iodine pills, in which the nuclear scenario would be one of the most concerning possibilities. Movements have been observed in areas where Iran's nuclear facilities are believed to be located. It's not known whether it's to take something out of there or to put some kind of, I don't know. I mean, honestly, I've seen 1,000 theories about it. Honestly, it's not clear to me because there's no clear evidence. I mean, what there is evidence of is that there are movements there. What there is evidence of is that there are nuclear facilities there. But not to what extent. It's not even known if enrichment there is above 60%. What is known is that the material above 60% amounts to 440 kilos as acknowledged by Iran. They themselves acknowledge it. Beyond that, nothing is known. It is suspected. Experts warn that if the regime survives, and that's the problem right now, isn't it? And that's what they're trying to convince Trump and Europe of, right? To say, look, okay, they're already at war, right? It's already a war, okay. But what's the next step? Let's suppose the United States withdraws. If not, I withdraw and leave. I'll leave you your filthy Strait of Hormuz. Deal with it yourselves, as he said repeatedly. So he leaves. And no matter what, this would be seen by the Iranian regime. We won. First point, well, terrible for the future. They would say we won. They left. No, they left a mess here. Look at how they left all this mess here. But we won. So they would say, since we won, we deserve a prize. And that prize is making nuclear weapons. So hurry up and make them. Make them secretly and announce when ready. For now, just make them. Or you keep the ambiguity, like Israel does, right? It keeps things ambiguous. I have them, I don't have them, yes I have them, no I don't. And everyone knows they do have them. But since it's ambiguous, nobody knows the quantity or the capability of those nuclear weapons. It remains in the realm of strategic ambiguity, as they call it, right? The nuclear risk, if this remains unresolved, would be complex. I mean, it would be a country that adapts to a conflict like Ukraine did, which adapted to the conflict, but with the intention, well, to arm itself, right? To arm itself with nuclear weapons. At first it would be very difficult, but over time, if this war continues, just imagine, because in the end, time is against Trump. I mean, in the sense that, well, he has, 3 years left in office, 3 years, something like that. Yes, but those years fly by. And the resentment and the mess that the war is going to leave here, well, that's not going to be forgotten in 2 or 3 years. New leaders will come, or the same leaders who are here now will say, well, it's necessary, right, to have these weapons, etc., etc. And this is going to be justified internally until they have nuclear weapons. So the most realistic scenario isn't this one, but it's a very likely scenario. Yes, war. Yes, the regime stays, basically. If the regime remains, there will be nuclear weapons. If the war continues on a moderate scale, a long war, an extensive war, with domino effects for the whole world, right? For at least a minimum of 1 year, right? With effects like rising oil prices, economic problems. So, scenario number 3, the mini world war, right? And scenario 4 is negotiation. I wish we could be talking about a negotiation where the regime says, well, I'm stepping down, which, I mean, I don't see happening. I don't see how that could happen. And on the other hand, the other negotiation that the Iranians are asking for is the opposite, right? Not only do they not withdraw, but they want guarantees that there will never be a war, that they can keep enriching uranium, and basically that everything will be in their favor. So it doesn't look very... I mean, out of all the scenarios, the negotiation is the one I see as least likely, but it could still happen just because, well, in theory, nobody wants war, right? I mean, in theory, the countries, I guess, right? They don't want war. They would have, honestly, I don't know. I'm not in the mind of the Revolutionary Guard, but I would bet, I mean, based on what I see, I would bet that they do want it. Even though in theory they say a human wouldn't want a normal war, well, yes, but we're not talking about normal people either, right? We're talking about people who think differently in that sense, right? And who, according to what they say, their approach is to make sure it doesn't happen again. I mean, the approach is going to be they'll accept whatever consequences it takes until it doesn't happen again. And on the United States side, the Pentagon, well, I suppose that military intelligence says you can't leave the regime in place. I mean, you can't leave it halfway because you've already made the move. But you're not going to leave the hive there because the wasps will come, they'll regroup, and they'll be even more dangerous, right? So if not, well, you shouldn't have moved it. Now that you did, you have to remove the hive, right? Basically, right? And you're going to get stung, you're going to have trouble, but at least the problem won't get stronger or keep growing. That's possibly the other scenario, right? The scenario, what would Israel want? Israel says, you can't leave me with this mess half finished because that would be a problem. The whole issue is really strange, but let's move on to other points. The Iranians have threatened to completely shut down the region. A high-ranking Iranian official issued an explosive warning through the Reuters news agency and said the following in an interview. If the US attacks Iran's power plants, the response will be devastating across the region. The threat would not be any less. They would be targeting the countries in the region. They would attack the oil and gas economies and the power plants. The situation would also escalate because the Houthis would close the Bab al-Mandeb Strait, according to this official. The closure of that other strait would drive prices even higher and cause an immediate global energy crisis. According to these sources, these threats were not improvised. They were already formally communicated to the Trump administration. Trump has a document in his office that states what the Iranians' plan is, as told by them. In other words, they themselves are telling him this is what will happen, just so you know what's coming next. Another issue that also draws attention is the IMF. The IMF has also issued a warning. This isn't about science funds, but about debt. According to the IMF, they issued a strong warning. Emerging markets, meaning emerging countries that are doing well, that are growing, but have a lot of debt. Be careful. According to current reports, these countries would be at high risk. Countries with a lot of debt, excessive debt. Be careful. The main problem isn't the conflict, but the type of money that supports these economies. The highly volatile capital coming from hedge funds and investment funds. Last year, approximately $4 trillion flowed into emerging markets from non-banking sources. This increases the fragility of global financial systems. These are the same investors who are in those emerging economies. People who make quick money in a short time are the first to leave when there is a war. Yes, so these investors, these funds leave. They say, okay, war is coming, and they leave, making the country unstable. A country that was just starting to stabilize and do well suddenly loses the funds and begins to collapse. So that's one scenario. He says that in a tense scenario like the current conflict, these expensive funds are making credit more expensive and slowing down the growth of those countries. In addition, there are strong devaluations, even capital flight, which would trigger inflation and reduce purchasing power. The IMF warns that a recession is already being seen and that, well, they are right now in what we could call a potential crisis. In the initial phase of a potential crisis, or a crisis that is just starting to emerge. They say, well, another factor that concerns them is the rise of stablecoins. They say these economies, although they seem stable, depend on highly volatile crypto markets. Private credit is also growing, a less regulated system that has multiplied its size by 5 in recent decades. Opaque credit makes it difficult to detect risks in time, which could also worsen a crisis if it breaks out suddenly. Director Kristina Georgieva of the IMF warns that even if the war ends, the global economic damage is already underway, or even that. If an agreement is reached, the problem is already here. It has already begun. That's the issue right there. Also, other important developments in the last few hours following the negotiations, or possible negotiations, according to what they report, they are right now. Well, on what they call the brink of something historic, the deadline. As they call it in the United States, 8 p.m. Eastern Time in Washington, set by Trump himself. They say that if the agreement can't be reached before that deadline, this is going to take a turn. The Vice President of the United States is directly involved in the negotiations at this moment, high-level talks because of the importance of the conflict. That is also confirmed now, right? Because if there were suspicions about that, since he was there. And also apparently the issue. Yes, another issue drawing attention is a crash. Well, now some images are starting to appear where you can see this collapsed train, the train that's apparently crashed over there in France. Let's get into the details. The TGV high-speed train was involved in a devastating accident in northern France on one of the most advanced railway networks in the world between the city of and the region of Pas-de-Calais, or however you say it, right? This happened at 7 in the morning. The train was carrying 243 passengers on a key route between Dunkirk and Paris. The impact was with a truck that was carrying military material, which adds a critical element to the investigation. The train driver died instantly, confirming the severity of the crash. It is also reported that there are 2 other people in critical condition, and at least were injured, some with serious injuries. There is also talk now of 27 people with minor injuries, in addition to the 11 more seriously injured, 2 in critical condition, and 1 deceased. The driver of the military truck has reportedly been detained, although it has not been confirmed whether he is a member of the military or a truck driver hired to transport military goods. This has not been clarified either. Another issue that has also hardly been mentioned, it's the attack that was carried out by Israel. An attack that, well, draws attention because normally Hezbollah's infrastructure had been targeted, right? But this attack hit other facilities. Look, according to what Israel reports, they launched a high-impact air offensive. This was against targets in Lebanon and Iran. One of the main targets was a petrochemical complex in Shiraz. It's key for the chemical components used for explosives and ballistic missiles, according to the IDF. These facilities were one of the few that remained operational until the previous attacks. The attack would have directly affected Iran's military capability, especially in the production of advanced weaponry. So, well, that's also the case. More developments on that topic, right? No. Even though there's talk of an ultimatum in place, the war is still going on, right? I mean, in that sense, it hasn't stopped. By the way, do you also remember this journalist? It's Chali. Let's quickly look for a photo of the journalist. She's a journalist who was in Iran. She was captured. She was taken hostage. Now, well, she has already been found and has been released. According to the reports, that's it. Let's see if we can show her over there. That's her. There she is. According to what the journalist reports, the American journalist has been released after spending a week kidnapped in Baghdad. The group responsible would be one called Kataib Hezbollah. According to what they themselves confirmed on an official channel, they are the ones who had captured her. The release obviously was not free. The main condition was that Kittleson leave Iraq immediately. So far, her exact location remains unconfirmed. This really creates uncertainty. It's not clear whether she's okay or not. It's not clear how they brought her back. I mean, we know she's alive, that's all. But that too, well, is part of what's happening in these last moments. Tell us about other important matters too, yes. A few notes before we move on to the important comments. There was also a shooting at the Israeli consulate in Istanbul. The police confirmed that one of the terrorists had lost his life and there were 4 injured. According to what is known, an armed man was shot dead and 2 more people were injured in a shootout with the police in front of the Israeli consulate in Istanbul today. This was reported by the local governor. 2 officers also sustained minor injuries during the confrontation. Thank you. The same authorities reportedly identified the attackers. The same Turkish Minister of the Interior, Mustafa Şiflik, stated that the suspects arrived in Istanbul in a rental vehicle from Izmit. One of the attackers was affiliated with an organization that operates in the region without specifying the name of the group. It has not been said. It has not been said which group it is or which group they belong to. That is also important. Another issue also attracts attention. The IOM reportedly said, this international organization for migration reportedly counted nearly 1,000 people who have lost their lives this year on the migration route through the Mediterranean. Since March 28, just 180 people have lost their lives or are missing in this region of the world. It's also an important issue. This area also continues to claim many lives. Another issue as well. Seoul is seeing significant progress toward peace between North Korea and South Korea after praise from Pyongyang. The South Korean president expressed his regret over the incursion of drones into North Korean territory. Yesterday, he even apologized to North Korea because the previous president, who is now in prison, had launched a drone. And well, they also said that they really appreciated the comment. The prompt confirmation and communication of the intention of the leaders of South Korea and North Korea to cease unnecessary acts that intensify military tensions. It constitutes an important step toward peaceful coexistence, said the spokesperson for the South Korean Ministry of Unification. That's what's been reported in detail. An interesting topic, isn't it? There could be a dialogue between North Korea and South Korea. Well, at least there's a beginning of dialogue, which is possibly positive, all things considered, right? Especially at this time, right? Well, another important issue. Iran warns the United States that it will respond beyond the region. That's what I meant about the chance this could spread beyond the Middle East. Because, well, this currently seems like a remote war for the United States. But the Iranian Revolutionary Guard warns, and this is directed straight at the United States, that if they follow through with the threat to attack power plants, bridges, and so on, they will go beyond the region. The Revolutionary Guard stated once again that if they are attacked or if those red lines are crossed, they say, our wrath will follow. And our response will go beyond the region. The word wrath is used. The elite military corps issued the warning. Iranian, according to a statement from the Iranian Fars agency. According to them, we will not hesitate to respond in kind to the aggressors in more or less those words, but they point to going beyond the Middle East. I mean, they don't say the United States, but they make it clear that obviously the attacks would be aimed in that direction. It doesn't seem difficult, but not impossible, because in theory, there are these sleeper cells inside. The United States that could suddenly surprise, operate, or try to operate in those parts of the world. Another topic with more recent images that have been published are these images where Kim Jong-un appears. Well, he has supposedly decided to support Iran, or at least that's what they say they're considering doing. At least they posted these images, right? Aunque oficialmente no. Has military support been sent? His statements didn't criticize the United States, didn't criticize Trump, they just kind of hinted at it. That they may be thinking about helping Iran, or that they are determined to help Iran. But by not criticizing the United States or Trump, it stands out since they usually criticize a lot. Obviously, every time they say something about the topic of war, they always throw very strong criticism at the United States. This time they don't say anything. A lot of attention. What people believe here is that it's more like psychological help, right? I mean, it's like they're not going to get involved, but it's like saying they might want to get involved, but well, no, I don't see that happening anytime soon. At least not right now, no, not right now. Let's move on to other important matters. Well, right now there's talk of a fracture. This fracture is within the regime. According to what I was telling you a little while ago about Masupi Siskian. Now they are, well, at least that's what you can see from afar, right? But it shows a deep fracture. This is happening at the top of the power structure in Iran, where a report has revealed a bitter confrontation, they say, between the Revolutionary Guard and the current president of Iran. Masupi Siskian was elected, right? According to the Iran International Report, it confirms what I was telling you. So there is an intention to negotiate on Masupi's part, but on Mojtaba's part, and if he is aware, but on the Revolutionary Guard's part, and there we're talking about, well, several generals who would actually be controlling both the money and the issue of weapons, although supposedly they don't control the money. Well, an important part, about 20% of the economy, is controlled by them. Of the Revolutionary Guard, around 20%, and they've been given more and more power. But the other part, the majority, is controlled by the political chambers. So, well, where would he be right now? The Revolutionary Guard wouldn't be, I suppose, just making the only decisions they think are right for them, for their strategy, but without taking into account Masupi Siskian, who is, after all, a politician and wants to negotiate something that, well, doesn't seem like it's going to happen. There is already a reaction from Israel as well about what they think is going to happen. The Israeli army says it will intensify operations in Tehran. In order to degrade the Iranian regime, that's what I was telling you. Well, that's it. That's what the Chief of Staff Yal Samir says, that their strategy is exactly that. They have to go after the entire regime. They don't want to be caught in the middle, since they'd see it as too risky, wouldn't they? If you've already gotten involved and this conflict has already started, if what's happened has happened, then obviously what comes next will be a reaction. Yes. If the regime stays in power, obviously. But anyway, let's move on to the comments. Let's quickly read some comments. We'll obviously be giving updates, right? How this topic is going for those who are in Washington right now. It's 3 o'clock there. Here it's 1 or 2, I mean. At 6 in the evening. At 6 in the evening it closes. I think they're going to catch me walking down the street. He's going to be checking how things are going. If anything happens, we'll be talking about it. Live, wherever I am. Even if it's with the cell phone or however, but we'll broadcast there, right? We'll be paying attention to whatever might happen from now until 6 in the evening, Mexico time. That's going to be the topic, right? If they're watching us in Spain, over there it would be 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 1, like 1 in the morning, right? 1, 2 in the morning, more or less, it would be in Spain, right? So let's just estimate around there. There, depending on where you are. If you're in Argentina, in Chile, in the United States, if you're in California, for example, right? Well, that's where the time differences come in. How have you been? Full throttle, Donald. How have you been? Greetings all the way up north to North Carolina, right? Cheers. How are you doing over there? What's new? Qatar, how have you been? It's been very interesting. Well, what's been happening with the weather here, where I am? Well, we're at 20 degrees. And we're waking up to 15 degrees, and I see that tomorrow, and the day after tomorrow, and the days after that. Every day it's going to be like this, 15, 20 degrees. I mean, it's almost like it's winter in April. That's not common at all. And yeah, a lot of rain, which is actually good, right? It's going to be raining, you know, all those days. Greetings, Marco. How have you been? Greetings all the way to Miami. Hello there. Miami time. Let's see. What time is it in Miami right now? Excuse me. Miami, right? I think it's Eastern time, right? Over there too. Yeah, I mean, it's Eastern time over there. I mean, it's the same. You guys have the same time as Washington, right? You have the same time as Washington, yes. So, at 8 p.m. for you, okay? Just to be sure. At 8 your time in Florida, in general in Florida, that's the situation. I mean, the weather. I'm not sure if it goes toward Tallahassee, but I don't think they have a different time zone. It should be the same. Let's see. Can I just put it as Florida like that? Thank you. Yes, all of Florida is the same time zone, from what I'm seeing. Oh, well, not in Pensacola. In Pensacola, it's 2:10. You're not in Pensacola. Well, then it's at 7 your time. If you're in Miami, you're in pretty much the rest of Florida. It's 3 p.m., so that's it. So 8 p.m., but it's 3 right now. 8 p.m. will be the moment when Donald Trump makes his decision. I don't know if he's going to say it there. Well, we've entered another phase of the war. I mean, if he's going to decide right at 8, or if we're just going to hear about it minutes later, hours or days later, well, we don't know. No, it's not clear, right? There were reports from American media that they were going to extend it for another 10 days. Maybe that's what happens, an extension, right? And they say, you know what? Another 10 days that could also happen. At that time, the Asian markets are already open. I mean, the oil markets. We'll have to pay attention to that as well. Because by 8 p.m. Eastern Time, the markets in Asia are already open and operating. So that's when we can see if oil prices have skyrocketed. Right now, they're still at 8 or 9, just like when we started, 8 or 9. Sorry, I mean 109. $109. That's the price of oil. And the same goes for everything else. I mean, there isn't much variation. You don't see any major problems. So far, I don't see it. UTI is also at 114, almost 115, just like yesterday, so the price remains the same in that regard. Francisco Arce, how have you been? And if they've started, yes, there were attacks. Yes, there were attacks. There were attacks. No. No, that invasion is happening, right? But there were explosions today. This has already been confirmed, yes. To what? I don't know. I don't know. I don't have the information. I mean, what is suspected is that these are attacks not on depots or on the oil itself, but rather on some issue, on some infrastructure. I find it interesting because if there are attacks happening in that area of the island, which has already been confirmed, it means that maybe they're carrying out attacks before an invasion, right? It would have to be done. I mean, if they were already thinking about invading, assuming that tonight or tomorrow or in the next few days, and they said, okay, they're going to take the island, right? They would have to finish off what's left of the Revolutionary Guard forces, what's left of the radars, anything related to communications. All of that has to isolate the island almost completely, right? So that they can take control. I'd even say one action might be to cause an evacuation so as few people as possible are there, right? Maybe, but it would make sense, right? That before an invasion, first, they attack and wipe out anything that could cause them a problem. How have you been? Greetings, Nicoli Franco. Greetings to Spain, to Tenerussia. Hello there. Norberto, how are you? How have you been? Greetings, Francisco. How is Mexico City? Eliseo, Pedro, how have you been? And a big shout out to you too. And to the whole community that's joining, thank you very much. We'll see each other again later, right? We'll be around here later. We'll be checking all the details, anything that comes up. We'll see each other here again, right? Big hug. Take care. See you later.